I just finished the main campaign of Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League about 2 hours ago. My playthrough clocked in at about 13 hours for mainly the main story missions, but a little bit of dabbling in some of the side stuff to see what variability it brought. I have a lot of damn thoughts about this game, and unlike the mainly positive centric notions of my earlier impressions video, these thoughts are both positive and negative. There's a lot to like in Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, but there's a lot of underlying problems with the game that makes you wonder what could have been if this game wasn't trying so hard to be a live service and a good single player game at the same time. Hopefully, I'll be able to let you know whether you should even consider picking this game up now or wait for a sale, and what the game truly offers to the player. The question in today's video is Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League as bad as people say? Let's get right into the brunt of the video. Of course, there'll be zero spoilers throughout the entirety of this discussion, except for a few minor gameplay spoilers. As mentioned in my earlier impressions video, the presentational prospects of this game is absolutely amazing and is definitely up there to the level Rocksteady has previously showcased in the Batman Arkham games. I think it's important to reiterate that I don't agree with a lot of the general consensus online claiming that Batman Arkham Knight looks so much better than this game in every single way. The two different atmospheres, lighting options, and color palettes across both games make a comparison actually difficult, but even so, the animations and facial expressions of every interaction throughout this game is absolutely fantastic and can be considered next gen in every metric. Rocksteady's recreation of Metropolis is a sprawling and beautiful one, with its night and day cycle offering two different outlooks into the city overcome by evil. I was taken aback at several moments while playing through the game, glaring at Metropolis and all of the little details packed throughout its surroundings. The graphical fidelity of the game throughout the city, in cutscenes, in dialogue, and general free roam around the world is superb, and Rocksteady has delivered on that front substantially. As mentioned earlier, presentational aspects such as facial expressions are by all accounts top notch in this game, and Rocksteady continues to excel in the field of presentation, and that is still present within the confines of this game. In addition to that, there has been a lot of complaints online about certain character designs, but to me, on every level, the designs are absolutely fantastic, from the entire Suicide Squad themselves to the individual designs of the members of the Justice League, which is all topped off by the game's fantastic graphical fidelity and pure detail packed into every aspect of the game's locations and cutscenes. For mostly on a presentational landscape, Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League is still a showcase of Rocksteady's expertise in this aspect of games, and you won't be disappointed by how the game looks in any way. Of course, without any spoilers, I'm going to have to keep this section short, but oh man, do I have mixed feelings about the story in the game. On one hand, it has some of the best moments I think I've seen in a Rocksteady game, but on the other hand, there's just some bizarre cutscenes and writing decisions that just left me more confused and stunned than anything else. Some of the weird writing decisions in the game took me aback, but then some of the most dramatic and beautiful moments of the game feel less impactful when they're mixed in with some of this slog. Don't get me wrong, I really don't think this is a bad story at all. It has some amazing moments throughout, and in particular, every time a member of the Justice League is on screen, I was sitting upright in my chair, eagerly waiting to see the dialogue between them and the Suicide Squad. The performances in this game are fantastic from everyone in the cast, and in particular, Kevin Conroy's performance here is one of his best in the entirety of the Arkham games. They've given him a lot of dialogue, not only in the cutscenes he is featured in, but the radio chatter you constantly hear while roaming around the city, and this made me, a big fan of the Arkham series, very happy. The dialogue and banter between the Suicide Squad is also great, from their interactions within cutscenes to the little questions they ask each other while you fight enemies or roam around the world. There are a lot of things to like about the story of this game, but by the very end of it, I just felt like I yearned for what could have been. Of course, from the get-go, the entire premise of the Suicide Squad somehow killing the Justice League is absurd, but as the game continues, the deaths of these beloved characters just becomes more and more absurd, to the point of absolute hilarity, especially when they kill Superman. I don't care if the Suicide Squad know the weaknesses of these superheroes, it just doesn't make sense for them, with all of their incompetence and just some basic guns, to be able to kill some of the most powerful people of the universe in a few minutes. Not to mention some of the boss fights such as the Flash can can feel so damn underwhelming that it's depressing. Some of the boss fights are actually decent send-offs for the heroes that die, while others just see them die by a stray bullet without any final words. It's bizarre that they're even this weak to a bunch of bullets, and don't even get me started on the game's ending. Leaning back into the live service bullcrap of the game, Rocksteady's traditional cinematic endings is disrupted by a bizarre introduction to post-game content and the game's future roadmap that takes away any of the suspense of the game's ending and what the hell just happened. The final boss fight has to be the worst boss fight in the game, and the ending really left a sour note on an otherwise decent story. The story here is not even close to the quality of what Rocksteady cooked up in the Arkham trilogy, and although it has some absolutely amazing moments, incredible cinematic shots, and a superb production value, it can fall flat when the deaths of some superheroes and their send-offs is laughable, and the ending is so bad that it drags the entire game itself down in its entirety. It's clear that Rocksteady tried to create a great story, but they're constantly punched to the ground by their integration of live service mechanics, which doesn't allow them to live up to their once cinematic prowess in the industry. When watching the trailers for the game, the gameplay was definitely the thing I felt like I was going to have a problem with. It all looked very samey from the outset, shooting purple zits while jumping around the city of Metropolis, shooting whatever guns you've collected while doing missions. But the gameplay here is surprisingly a highlight, with it packing enough punch to make it consistently fun and enjoyable, even to the very end of the game's main story campaign. This game is inherently a looter shooter, live service game, and so every component of the game is so obviously designed around this very premise, including all aspects of the game's gameplay systems. First, I want to touch base on the game's combat. The combat in this game is surprisingly really damn fun. You're able to instantaneously switch between the 4 different members of the Suicide Squad, and they've all got their own unique traversal mechanics, melee attacks, and abilities that makes them all feel diverse and interesting to play, which is why I constantly switched between them as I played through the game. The combat here isn't exactly complex, but depending on the character you're playing as, you're able to choose from a range of weapons such as the general assault rifles, shotguns, pistols, and sniper rifles, with of course different mods for the characters and the upgrades they can utilize, of which I'll discuss a little later in this section. Every character feels snappy to play as, and this is definitely helped by their unique mobility options. Without this component for each character, the combat would be a lot more dull, but with it, you're able to have a unique playstyle that you're able to tailor to each character you play as. For example, Harley Quinn's traversal involves grappling and swinging around, allowing you to dodge bullets as you weave through the sky, spraying bullets on enemies, or getting up and personal with Harley's bat that you can change as you play through the game. Or if you feel like flying around the city and in enemy encounters, Deadshot's jetpack can add a lot of mobility and diversity to the combat. That made him easily my favorite character to play as. Drifting through the city while sniping all the enemies below you is super fun. Of course, Captain Boomerang and King Shark also have a unique arsenal of abilities and weapons that also makes them super fun to play as. Of course, as a looter shooter, there is a lot of enemies on screen at one time, and there is a lot going on constantly, with damage numbers popping up all over the screen as you fight enemies, making every enemy encounter very explosive, with grenades erupting all over the place and numbers filling every corner of the screen. I'm not usually a fan of these types of games, but the combat in this game is snappy enough and diverse enough to keep me constantly engaged throughout my entire playthrough. However, although in my impressions video I was very happy with the current enemy variety, past the 5-hour mark it never improved, meaning that the enemy variety in the game was actually very lackluster, and the way you take down all the enemies is pretty much the same, with no true diversity in how you take down enemies both big and small, which makes me concerned for as to how this game will fare as a live service game if enemies are boring to fight by the end of the game. I'd also like to touch upon the mission design of the game, because it is by every account the most boring thing about the gameplay of the game. It becomes very repetitive about 8 hours in for me, and you are constantly doing the same thing over and over again in every mission in the game, from the various side missions and quests to the objectives of the main quest. There is no true diversity in the mission design, and there's literally 3 different mission types in the game, which again doesn't seem very promising for a game that's supposedly a live service game that should engage you for months and even years. Every single mission involves doing the same thing of either defending something by killing enemies or destroying something by killing enemies, and that over and over again. The game lacks any diversity, such as for example investigation missions or anything of a nature that doesn't explicitly include just killing waves of enemies enemies over and over again without any true diversity throughout the game's missions and their objectives. The only time missions feel different is the actual missions of killing members of the Justice League, but even a couple of them feel very similar to each other and are underwhelming, making the entirety of mission design prospects in this game not very good at all. Speaking about missions, I think it's time to talk about what you do in between missions, the game's general exploration and traversal. As mentioned before, the game's recreation of Metropolis is fantastic, and between all of it are little details scattered around the city that not only tell a story of the League's formation, but the history and people of Metropolis as a whole. The game's traversal is of course great as a fact of the unique traversal options of the 4 playable characters, which makes it really fun to roam around the city as you get from mission to mission. I'll recount some of the details I found fascinating that I spoke about in my impressions video, with the most fun one for me being the Arkham Museum, which essentially allowed you to look into the events of the Arkham games and see a personalized description of different villains in Batman's rogue gallery. There was another little detail like this where you end up in the Daily Planet and see the name tag of Clark Kent, for example, and are able to walk around the Daily Planet seeing the stories that they are reporting on while Lois Lane talks to you in the meantime. The exploration of the game isn't grand and isn't something you'll be distracted by, but I did at several moments just observe posters or little details scattered around the huge city that in a way told the story of a game I would have rather seen in seeing the formation of the League and Batman's inclusion in it. Well, lastly, I want to discuss the game's gear and loot systems. As a game marketed as a looter shooter, there's of course a gear system in the game, but surprisingly enough, it doesn't feel as forced or obstructive as other looter systems in other games, where loot is scattered all over the floor and you have to sift through hundreds of weapons after every enemy encounter to figure out what to equip. You'll get a handful of weapons by completing missions, and if they are tailored specifically to one member of the Suicide Squad, they'll automatically equip it, saving you the hassle of needing to sift through a bunch of loot just to find one piece of equipment. Of course, I was really annoyed that every mission ended abruptly with a mission report and a sort of supply drop system where you open it to get gear of varying degrees of rarity to utilize for future missions. These supply drops makes it clear to me that at one point it seemed like they were going to monetize these as actual supply drops that you could purchase with real money, but this was scrapped late into the game's development cycle. Overall, the loot system isn't as egregious as I thought it was going to be, and I have no real complaints about it, as it didn't really obstruct my enjoyment of the general gameplay and the world of Metropolis itself. Of course, they've got to make some money in some way, otherwise this really wouldn't be a live service game. At the moment, the game lacks a lot of the live service flair, as the actual seasonal content begins next month, and so for now the brunt of monetization is through a store in which you can purchase cosmetic skins and emotes for the Suicide Squad and not really much else. With the game's seasonal content release, that's going to be a paid battle pass and who knows what else they'll be monetized, which is where we will see the real extent of the game's monetization. But for now, there's not really much to it. But even the cosmetics you can currently purchase are very lackluster, and like Halo Infinite before it, you legit have to purchase different color variants of skins you already have for like 10 to 15 real world dollars, making this a telltale sign the game's actual monetization later down the road might be less than honorable. But the game doesn't actually monetize weapons, better loot or missions, and so I have to give them props for that, as the game isn't pay to win in any regard, with instead you only having the option to purchase cosmetic traits for your character. Overall, there isn't much to say about the monetization of the game, because it's just come out and there's not really much in the store that really screams out scummy in any way, surprisingly enough. My verdict for the game is a mix of positives and negatives, although I'd say more positives at the moment. I feel like this game is the definition of a 7 out of 10 game, and it's decent but nothing more. It's still sad to see, as this is definitely Rocksteady's worst work yet, and there's many regressions from the Arkham series that could have made this game so much better if they were not just gone from the game. If you're a fan of the Arkham games and you enjoy these sorts of looter shooter games, you'll enjoy this game. As for whether or not you should purchase it now, I believe unless you don't have anything else to play right now, even a 10 to 20% discount would make it more plausible to buy the game, as hopefully it will have some seasonal content and a proper end game to justify purchasing a story shorter than all of the Arkham games. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed today's review. If you did, consider subbing to the channel and dropping a like, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.